The man throws the papers in the heroine's face and shouts at the girl that the report is disgusting. The boss can't believe that the girl could afford to write such a bad report. The boss says that his employee is really stupid and orders her to go and redo all this work. After all, the girl has to work overtime today. Otherwise, the heroine will be fired if she doesn't agree to her boss's terms. The girl realizes that this disgusting job as usual makes her hate her life. A man comes up to the girl and says he apologizes to his supervisor, but he has to go. The heroine says it's okay and she thanks the guy for his hard work. It's her assistant June. The guy says that the manager will probably be here for a long time, and the heroine smiles to show that everything is fine. After all, she's perfectly fine, and don't let assistant June worry. She was sure that everything will be fine, and it's an overtime day like always. The heroine's name is Kang Hyun, and she died alone in her office. The girl had so little energy before she died that she couldn't even allow herself to smile. She can't feel anything and tries to ask what happened. Was there really an explosion? There were shards of glass lying beside Kang Hyun. She had always been lonely. And even now, when a girl dies. Kang Hyun can't think of anything else right now, but dying on the job is sad. But if you think about it, there's a silver lining. Now Kang Hyun doesn't have to endure all that pain, but a spark bursts out of a nearby computer, and strange lights start glowing all over the room. The girl has been transported to another world by divine will or by ordinary chance. The situation repeats itself again, and sheets of her painstaking work fly at the girl. She looks coldly at the man standing before her. The guy says that Margaret is ignoring him again. The man does not understand what the sister has a head on her shoulders for. Is it really just an ordinary piece of jewelry? He's said many times that girls should respect her. The heroine's name is Valita, and she would never have thought that she would be in this situation, and this damn life has gotten to Valita that she just wants peace and quiet. However, even after Valita's death, they don't see any relief. She's reborn into the body of a villain from a game designed for a female audience. A game called Guardian Garden. It is a dating simulation game in which the protagonist chooses one of 4 male characters and develop a relationship with them. Unlike other games, it is very unique and has an RPG component and is currently the #1 selling non-specialized game in Korea. Of course, Valita is glad she died in her old body. She could have done it 100 more times. But why is Valita reborn as a villain? The girl doesn't know how to change her fate. Valita is the daughter of the Marquis, and one who possesses a perfect origin and exceptional beauty. This girl is luminous with her appearance and gives hope to men for a happy future. But in contrast to her appearance, Valita's character is rather nasty. The girl does not tolerate disrespect for herself and cannot contain her emotions. She was born and raised in an ancient family, which is said to be the Pearl Empire, and is considered equal in importance to the emperor. Meanwhile, as Margaret is kind and the protagonist considers Valita her friend, but Valita is constantly causing trouble for Margaret. And at the end, for the happy ending, one of the main male characters kills Valita in one way or another to make the life of the protagonist Margaret happy. She realizes that in one of the endings, Valita is killed by her own brother, who is crazy about the main character. His name is Luther of the Alden family. Valita realizes that she refused to meet Margaret more than once, and she was furious, and she realizes that she's been trying to figure out what's going on for a long time. Anyway, this guy is one of Margaret's suitors. But as Valita pondered these thoughts, a smile appeared on her face that was not allowed for her sibling. The man raises his hand to strike the girl, for she is out of her mind, and how dare she laugh at him. The next moment, Luther's hand is gaining momentum, and in the next minute it should have hit the girl's face. She is not going to suffer in her second life, so realize all she has to do is obey. The next moment, Valita falls to her knees and apologizes to her brother. It hits the man like an electric shock, and Luther didn't expect such a reaction from his bitchy Valita. The man sees that the girl is on her knees and not moving. He doesn't understand what Valita is doing this time, because her character is different from what she is showing now. Why the girl who always behaves like a rabid dog was quiet today and now kneels before her brother. Luther doesn't understand why this is happening, and it remains a mystery to him. At one point, the man thinks of drawing his sword from its sheath and takes hold of it with his hand. But the next moment he decides there's no need, so he takes it and puts it back in its scabbard almost without pulling it out. Luther says he doesn't know what Valita is thinking, but he's giving her one last chance, so he asks Velita to think it over. Luther goes on to say that the next time she hurts Margaret, Luther will throw Velita to the dogs to eat. Luther then leaves the room and Velita is left alone in the hall. The girl begins to shake and realizes that everything annoys her in this world. The girl was very prestigious that she had to sit on her knees. Velita doesn't understand why she ran into her brother. Even if it was an accident, Kang Hyun can't believe that she's in front of a loser who treats her worse than an animal. But Velita realizes she had no choice. She planned to dodge the blow. One way or another, Velita will make sure Luther falls with the protagonist. Velita is a villain, and a happy ending is death for her, and a bad ending is death for the protagonist is the rules of the game. Velita realizes that she has no choice, and the girl must create a bad ending for her survival. Next, Velita tries to use the bell to summon the maid. The next moment, one of the maids runs up and asks, "Did the mistress call for her?" Velita wonders if Margaret is here and is curious to know that information. The maid says Margaret is in the parlor, and Velita asks the maid to bring her here. The maid then agrees with her lady and leaves. Velita decides to open the task window in the game to take a close look at what is happening. Velita looks and sees in her characterization that the girl has a hidden task, and it is called Guardian Garden. The game welcomes the girl to the Guardian Garden and asks her to complete the game and also receive a reward. The reward is a return to her world, and the punishment for failing the task is that the game will never end. Velita is surprised that she can't remember when her character was given a menu like this. But it's clear that the information written here is not the same as what is shown to normal players. It's probably programmed automatically. Anyway, it's a game created by Velita. The girl realizes that these rules don't suit her and needs to rework the story in her own way. Velita won't die that way. The beautiful and gentle Margaret, the heroine of a game called Guardian Garden and the most popular of the 4 leading men. It was Kang Hyun's favorite character. Also, Margaret is the main reason why Velita dies in all the endings. Because in order to survive, Margaret must die first. The maid says that Miss Margaret has arrived and Velita meets the girl. The heroine didn't expect Margaret to be so beautiful. The first thing she must do is to get close to Margaret, because so far her plan is too vague and has no definite goals. Now Velita doesn't know what she should do right, either kill Margaret or try to change her fate in a more peaceful way. Next, Velita tries to show how sorry she is for Margaret, and fake tears come to her eyes. Velita asks if Margaret is okay. The main character approaches Velita and asks what's going on, and if Velita is in pain. But it turns out that Kang Hyun had no problem crying at the sight of Margaret, because in her previous life, Kang Hyun was a big fan, and now that she is in Velita's body, she can easily show her true feelings at the sight of Margaret. Of course, Velita knew that Margaret was beautiful, but not that beautiful. Honestly, Velita didn't think Margaret would come perfectly, and Margaret resented Velita because the girl didn't want to see Margaret for a week. Always considered Velita her friend, no matter how mean the girl was. When they created the game, they wanted to emphasize Margaret's goodness and Velita's evil nature. Now that Velita has become one with Kang Hyun, she's ashamed to look into Margaret's eyes. It's ironic that the creator of the game is in her own game for the person she programmed to die. Velita says she has always wronged Margaret and apologizes for it. If Margaret can forgive Velita, they can remain friends, and Velita wants to apologize for her selfish request. Margaret asks what Velita is talking about, and she would never take offense to her. The girl goes into a hug with her friend and says there is no need to apologize. After all, the two of them are good friends as it is. Velita felt Margaret's warmth and was surprised at how kind she had programmed this character to be. The real Velita had never apologized to Margaret, and it wasn't even possible to hear a single kind phrase from Velita in the game. Velita. All she's ever done is oppress her friend. Velita wonders how Margaret easily forgave her actions in the past. Velita can't let Margaret, who is such a sweetheart, get involved with bad people like her brother Luther. Velita says that Margaret's words made her feel better, and to be honest, Luther scared Velita for ignoring her friend, so she was very worried. Margaret says it's a real shame, and how can Luther lie like that since Margaret never asked him to scold Wellet? Margaret was shocked at Luther's meanness. Is he really hitting on Velita again? Margaret says that when they meet, they will make sure that Luther doesn't molest Velita so that he won't dare try to separate them again. Velita realizes that this was Luther's original plan, but she thanks Margaret. Velita realizes that it looks like she's off to a good start and will probably survive in this world. Now all Velita has to do, as her friend, is to make a path of flowers for Margaret to shine brightly. No problem, it won't happen again. And Velita promises Margaret that they'll be best friends. From now on, the path Velita takes will also be Margaret's path. Velita has chosen a different ending where everyone can survive. However, the question is whether Velita will be alive by then, because the game is programmed that only one can survive. Velita sits at the table where a sumptuous dinner has been set. The girl realizes that she must learn how the world works, but she doesn't even know how to eat according to aristocratic etiquette. The girl does not understand who could even come up with these little things, but still she was the developer of this game and must blame herself for it. It's tonight's dinner party that the chapter hosts every 15 days. Every 2 weeks, Carlin Alden has a dinner party with his heirs. And only children with gray hair and green eyes are considered their father's heirs. Only the heirs can stay in the mansion, and the rest of the children are kicked out with their mothers. This is a very cruel tradition, and tension reigns at this dinner. The father evaluates his heirs at the dinner to choose the future rulers of the family. The father decides which of the daughters or sons to favor or disfavor. Velita realizes that their head of the family is asserting himself through his children and shows the importance of belonging to the Alden family. He is definitely going to do something today, and Velita gets up not very comfortable. Velita thinks about what she can do now and hears one of her brothers say that he's heard their magical instruments are considered the best. Besides, the imperial family buys up the merchandise willingly. The father asks from whom his son has heard such information because it is very entertaining news. The father's name is Marquis Carlin Alden. The son says he heard this information through the ears in the imperial palace. They praised their instruments so much that the son almost got an earache. Velita realizes that this boy is trying to get his father's attention and flatter his father. It's pretty risky in this atmosphere. The girl guesses that now someone will definitely put a stick in the wheels of this imposter. The next moment, Luther raises his voice and asks, "Is his brother sure of the credibility in the words of his ears?" He should have found out if the rumors were true first, and only then told his father about it. The father shames his son and says Luther is right. One should always confirm information to trust one's ears only after a good verification. The son apologizes to his father and promises that he will make amends. Velita realizes that this situation was expected, but she has no time to worry about others. She is Velita, and everyone will notice at once that the girl is silent and doesn't eat, so she must not attract attention. Now Velita's problem is that the girl doesn't even know how to take cutlery properly, and she should have called the maid because the girl could have helped her. But now Velita finds herself in a very bad situation. The girl is shaking with fear and hopes that she can do. Everything is neat enough, but the next moment, everyone at the table is paying attention to Velita's behavior. The girl realizes that she probably failed in her stealth and has been discovered by everyone. But unfortunately, Velita is slashing her knife so loudly on the plate that even her father noticed it and demanded her daughter to be quieter. The girl is glad that her head didn't fly off her shoulders and she should continue to behave carefully. But unfortunately, the girl was so much focused on her inner thoughts that she didn't pay attention to the grinding sound that her cutlery makes when it touches the plate. The next moment, a piece of meat flies at Velita and falls right on her head. It is hurled by her father and shouts at his daughter that how she is laughing in the presence of her father is making a scandal, and he told her to keep the girl quiet. Carlin will not tolerate such behavior from his daughter and demands that the girl get out of his sight and not come. Not until she learns good manners. The next moment, a satisfied Luther rises from his seat and leads Wellet away behind him. The brother smiles and is pleased that his father kicked Wellet out. The father continues to yell that if his 18-year-old daughter doesn't learn proper table manners, he will slit her throat. Luther throws Velita to the floor and mockingly says that if she wants to die so badly, she should have made a bigger fuss. Luther says that Velita is a real disgrace to their family and then closes the doors. The girl realizes that she can because she created this game, and Luther is not much different from what the girl has experienced with other men. Apparently, the girl used her real-life experiences to project this story. Kang Hyun apologizes to Valita, and she will make it up to her by improving the heroine's life for the better. The girl can't believe she created such a sad story when she could have done some good to save this poor heroine. The real Valita grew up in the same atmosphere as Kang Hyun. To top it all off, Valita remembers her father saying that she was 18 years old. It's very strange, but it seems that the father remembers his daughter's age. When the original story begins, Valita is 21 years old, and there are 3 years left before the original story begins. Valita demands from the maid who is standing next to her that the girl bring newspapers because the lady wants to read a little news. In this case, she has 3 years to prepare for the main events. The girl reads the newspapers and realizes that this information she could have predicted. Everything is too terrible, and she doesn't know how to comment on the situation. Since she came up with this game from the beginning, Kang Hyun has no right to resent it. In order to survive and achieve a happy ending, Valita not only needs to repair her relationship with Margaret, but also pay attention to many other details. For this game, you need to have a good attention span as well as memory. For example, Valita has to follow the other male characters and get some people to act on her principle, and also she will have to take into account what is related to Ananta. In this world, there was magic and also magical tools that could be used to harness magical power. Magical objects symbolize the power that sword and saber warriors and mages could wield. The Alden family periodically supplied these items to the imperial palace, so they were able to become rich. However, the mothers of the magic items were the poor people. They secretly kidnapped people and auctioned them off. Those who did not possess mana were sold into slavery and appropriated the proceeds, and those who possessed mana were used to make magic items. And this illegal auction where the Aldens did their dirty business in the slave trade was called Ananta. As Valita expected before the events of the novel began, there were 3 years left, and it was good that the girl realized it before it was too late. After all, the day of the Ananta is coming soon. Valita will have to be at the event all the time afterwards and thinks it would be better to go on a reconnaissance trip beforehand to find out everything she needs to know. Valita realizes that her plan is perfect. She'll be able to get her revenge because how dare they grill a steak on her head. So she goes on a scouting mission to teach her family a lesson. After a while, the first of the month arrives. Valita has been waiting for this day for a long time and didn't think that it would be so hard to find normal clothes to secretly get to the hall. Valita realizes that it was good that her friend Margaret was there because she was able to find ordinary clothes and teach Valita table etiquette. We have to work as fast as possible, if only for Margaret's sake. Valita opens the map. The girl sees the layout of the building in front of her and realizes that it is good that she can use the map in this game, and did not think that the map could show her a secret passage about which nothing was said even in the novel itself. Valita thinks that maybe she can see hidden passages even in the Emperor's castle, and such an idea sounds pretty good. The girl knows what she could do with this information. After all, Valita is very bright and would never just solve such possibilities. It's a handy thing after all. Next, Valita uses the game's abilities to teleport from Alden Manor to Vintag's Alley. The girl realizes that cheats. It's the best thing in the world, and she didn't waste even a drop of her time to get here. Thanks to the secret care, Valita was able to get here safely in a short time. She wore the veil because she was afraid Valita might be recognized. The effect of the map is amazing, but Valita won't be at the auction anyway. She just needs to get into the room unnoticed. Valita doesn't even have an invitation card, but here it may be enough to just pay money to get into the auction. Then Valita realizes that this is the Ananta. The girl sees people coming to buy a slave. She hopes there are no acquaintances here. Luther is probably getting another rejection from Margaret now and not to worry about him. But the other characters could pose a possible danger to Wellet. She'll probably spot someone she knows right away. The next moment, a man walks into the podium and says that if everyone is gathered, they will start the auction. The man says that if people see the item they want, he asks them to pick up the number they got when they entered. Valita is uncomfortable with people being called things here. It doesn't sound very nice. Next, the human trader says that the first item opened is a very sturdy item. He is just over 20 years old in his prime. A man comes out and a handcuff and a collar. He used to be a gladiator and can be used for a variety of purposes. Valita realizes that here, slaves are not considered human beings, and they are just things needed for someone's benefit and money. On the hands and feet of slaves sold on Ananthi were worn magical objects that exploded when they tried to escape, and then the person died from a lightning-fast magical explosion. So, escape was impossible. Valita realizes that this is a horrible picture, and she was not prepared to see something like this in person. Next, the bidding starts at 550000 ions, and Valita realizes it's disgusting. People are bidding, and it goes up to 600,000, and Valita realizes it's a living person. But the worst part is that Valita is the one who created this game and designed a place like this. Kang Hyun didn't even expect to be such a horrible person. And not just Ananta, but the whole situation and the feelings of those slaves. As the auction went on, it showed Valita's helplessness. The merry man says they keep coming to the next lot. The girl realizes that this is the 8th slave she is showing at the auction. She feels her legs shaking, but Velit has no right to even look away. Everyone here today is lucky. The next item will be very rare. Valita turns her attention to the man who came in. The man says they managed to catch them with the help of a distinguished gentleman, and the last item they'll be selling will be 2 items at once. Valita doesn't understand the point of selling 2 items at once. Valita gets a bad hunch and thinks she knows who the next item might be. A slave trader presents the next item to the people, and the 2 are caught in the savannah and in an area that is officially recognized as dangerous. It turns out to be a brother and sister with different colored eyes. They are the twins of the Tan clan. People in the audience exploded with excitement. After all, if you look at their yellow-blue eyes, it proves that the people are really from a clan called Tan. They hope that these 2 have not had their eye color changed by magic and can look at these slaves who are just awesome. Valita hears the slave trader name a clan called Tan, and she can go crazy at the thought. Valita realizes that today is the day because the Tang are a formidable people who lived on the savannah. They were the main reason the area was recognized as a danger zone. They sometimes gave birth to strange children with different eye colors, yellow and blue. They possessed extraordinary strength, so they were often raised as warriors. The game sometimes mentioned these twins from the Tang clan. However, there was one problem. Carlin's revenge is not important right now. Valita needs to save these guys by any means necessary, and she will use any means to that end. They were directly connected to Velit's death. It's just a shame that in the game, the twins were already dead when the first mention of the Tan clan appeared in the game. They didn't manage to escape from the auction. Eventually, they died, and were used to make a magic item that became a powerful weapon, and in the second half of the game, fell into the hands of the final villain. This magical item brought great destruction to the world. Valita became one of the many victims. Therefore, Valita must save the twins as soon as possible, otherwise things will go too far, and she won't be able to fix anything in history. The bidding starts at 500,000 gold pieces. The girl realizes that 500,000 gold pieces. That's about 500 million Korean money, and these guys aren't cheap. Valita doesn't know what to do, and she entered this auction by accident, and she doesn't have that much money with her, and she doesn't have the bidding number. The girl pays attention to the status in her game and sees that there is an unforeseen situation, and there are kidnapped people at the Ananta auction. If the heroine frees these people, she will find reliable helpers, and Valita will have the opportunity to open up new storylines. In order to proceed, you must either accept or reject the game's offer. Valita realizes that she suddenly has an assignment, but she wonders why, because the main story hasn't started yet. This notification comes as soon as Valita decides to rescue these guys. Another chance for a new storyline. But Valita isn't the main character. It's just a possible new plot opening, but not a guaranteed one. Valita has no other choice anyway, so the girl agrees. The bidding continues and has already reached 15 million gold. Then they offer 4 million gold. But the next moment, number 44 rises in the hall, and Valita says she will offer 12 million. The people around were shocked and looked back sharply at the real lady, that she had offered such a great sum. But Valita didn't hesitate in her decision and realized it was the only way to save them. When Valita agreed to the task, a plate with the number 44 appeared in her inventory, and the girl had 70 million gold in her balance. The girl was incredibly shocked because this is a real fortune. 70 million gold pieces, if converted into money in the real world, It would be 70 billion Korean money, and one could go crazy. Velita was given this much money to complete the task, and her hands start to shake at the very thought that she is a real rich girl. But the next moment, Velita realizes that 70 billion is a very symbolic amount, because in her real life, the sales of the game called Guardian Garden was 70 billion, and that was the sales volume in the days when the girl was still alive. She realizes that now she can spend all this money, and with the help of this wealth, she will be able to realize all her plans. As if just yesterday she was told off by her boss for low sales. Well then, Velita just has to spend this money as the system demands. 12 million, and it was a very large sum that Kang Hyun offered. A laborer asks who wants to offer more. Even if Velita manages to buy back the twins, she will still try to use them to make a magic item. This is worth preventing in the beginning, and when she thinks of Carlone giving up such valuable material, she doesn't feel the least bit sorry for the money. None of the others could give a higher price than Velita offered, so they had to agree to give the two of them to the girl. Next, Velita wondered why the game gave her lot 44 and doesn't know why she feels so uneasy at the thought. The girl can't guess the secret the game is hiding. When Velita left the hall, she entered the secret passage with her new slaves in the vintage alley. The boys looked angrily at their new mistress and wished her nothing but death. Velita says she wonders if there are people around because they can see it. Kang Hyun realizes that first she has to gain the trust of the angry slaves and pulls out her dagger to inflict a wound on herself. As blood began to pour from her hand, she realized that it was more painful to make such a cut than she had thought. Velita then began to drip her blood from her hand onto the handcuffs that the slave girl was wearing, as well as her brother Gemini. The handcuffs were melted by the blood like hot lava. Velita says that it worked, and at times like this, the blood of the orders is of some use. There is no need for special tools, for the blood that flows in Velita's veins is magical. Now Velita asks the former slaves what they must have seen the girl do to them. Her blood can remove these magical shackles, and she has one request for the former slaves. But Kang Hyun already has the hands of the slaves reaching for Kang Hyun that jump on Kang Hyun and hack her hands. They say that Kang Hyun stinks, and the man smells like a disgusting snake. It smelled like that from the man who caught them, and this is where the Ananta is located. They also say they are very hungry and want to eat. Velita finds herself in a bad situation and hopes she can somehow get away with it. Velita realizes that it was a great idea to free the slaves with her blood, but she didn't think it would antagonize them. So what can she do to make the slaves realize that Velita had nothing to do with their kidnapping? But Velita thought it would be a good idea to feed them because she has a delicious cake in her inventory. She creates an object and asks if the boys want to eat. They pee on the offered treats, and then Velita's hands and greedily devour the food. If Velita had known this would happen, she would have stocked up on meat. They would have been well fed with the hearty meat, but her inventory only had a sweet treat. Now Velita thinks they won't be so wary of her. Next, the former slaves ask what Velita is going to do with them, and is she going to drag them off to her mansion where she will abuse them? Velita realizes that the guys have a hard time believing the girl and need to stock up on meat. Velita says that she can't capture the boys again, and considering the fact that she freed them herself. If she makes them slaves again, they will try to kill Velita at any cost. So the girl says she'll just let them go. But in return, Velit has one request and she wants help. She asks that the guys save those people who are also caught as well as them. The guys have abilities for such a task. The twins ask who Velita is if she is going to give them orders. Velita smiles sweetly and says she's the one who saved and fed the young boys. Velita looks at the angry brother and sister and asks if it's possible to make them spit out all the cake they ate. But the boys start nodding negatively that they won't give up the food they've consumed. Velita wipes her blood from her hand that has already dried a bit and says that if they apply this handkerchief with her blood, the shackles will disappear. Velita asks her to be more careful so that her brother doesn't get caught again, but it's time for Velita to go. The girl turns around and leaves the twins behind her. Velita thinks that this is enough, and the twins will return to the savannah and she will not meet them again. However, Velita doesn't know who the new storylines mentioned in the reward are connected to. The system then promised that Velita would get reliable helpers and opportunities to discover a new storyline. Further, In the Vintaga Ananta itself, people resented where their goods had gone up and demanded that they be refunded. The slave traders didn't understand how the slaves could have escaped, and it was simply unthinkable. The unknown guy was looking out the window and realized that tonight was just a great view. One of his servants said he was apologizing, but it wasn't the guards who let the slaves get away. Next, the young gentleman gets up from the windowsill and says that he was promised before that the Vintago street was completely blocked off, and the gentleman has no reason to worry. The man apologizes and the gentleman says that his assistant is of no use. Has he still kept such a useless dog by his side? Next, the gentleman steps on his servant's hands. The man says he doesn't remember having a parrot, so he demands that his servant shut up. The man's name is Noah, and he is the lord of the Duchy of Elsius. This character mysteriously appears, buys the twins from the Tang clan, and then quietly disappears. Noah realizes that this character was most likely the cause of the slaves' escape. He flushed like a snake and left not a shred of clue behind him. Noah tells his servant to watch the snake, and especially the head and tail. I wish I could have met the man who bought those twins. What kind of man is that? But at that moment, the man who bought the twins was sitting in his mansion trying to have a proper meal. Velita realized that she wasn't feeling well today and couldn't possess herself. She can't properly use etiquette to cut her meat, although she had nightmares with Noah all night. Of the 4 main characters in the game, 2 were normal and 2 were not. The first abnormal is naturally Luther, and the second is the craziest of all the characters from the Guardian Garden game. His name is Noah. This demon is in the flesh, and nothing can change him. Noah was an archmage and outwardly quite handsome, plus had the status of a duke that outwardly made him seem like the perfect groom for Margaret. He imprisoned Margaret in a dungeon and showed his madness in play more than once. It was simply horrible to dream about this terrible man. Velita was so afraid of running into Noah at the Ananth as well that it was a good thing it didn't happen. The next moment, Velita hears some shouting outside the door, and the man asks what is going on and where he was looking. How could there be escape from Ananta? Now these low-grade slaves will stop fearing them, and he is a real dumbass, and can he really call himself the heir and now let him get out of his sight? Velita happily realizes that it looks like Luther's having a hard time. The task is completed, and judging by the fact that the notification window is no longer popping up, the twins have complied with Velita's request. After hearing her father's screams, Velit's soul is relieved, and she feels as if a stone has fallen from her shoulders. Then Luther bursts into the room and says that he has a complaint against Velita. Velita asks, "Has Luther lost his mind? Hasn't his brother been taught to knock?" Luther asks why Velita's so calm when the whole house is abuzz. But Velita says she's ready to blow out the candles on the cake because Luther's in trouble. The girl asks, has her very modesty offended her unloved brother? Velita is holding a stake in her hands. She asks that perhaps Luther should put a stake on his head. But apparently Luther didn't like Velita's joke and says that Luther barged in on her to take out his anger on her. But he had no idea that Velita would react so calmly to his visit. How naive her brother has become. Though Margaret hadn't taken the initiative with Luther lately, so he's not himself, and that's probably the main reason for his anger. Velita says that it is a bit unpleasant that Luther has such a situation, but the man will pull himself together and try harder not to make mistakes. The heroine says that if her father finds out that Margaret has made Luther lose his head, she'll get it too. Either way, Luther is on the losing end, and it's better not to try to hurt Margaret too. But when Velita turned her head at some noise behind her, she was surprised. At first, Velita couldn't say anything, but when she saw her 2 buddies that she had rescued the day before in the window, she was very impressed. It was her twin brother and sister who had completed Velita's task and came to the palace. Velita was shocked at how these 2 could be here. She didn't expect them to just come here. Velita realizes that she has no right for anyone to notice these 2, and she needs to get out and deal with these upstarts. The girl gets up from the table and starts shouting that in general, she should not dare to harm Margaret and leave Velita alone, because Luther has spoiled her appetite so much. The next moment, Velita flies out of his office with great speed, and Luther realizes that he has never seen such a shocked Velita before, because something is obviously wrong with her, and Velita was different before. Luther looks after Velita, and realizes that there is probably a reason why Velita has changed so drastically. Next, Velita opens the window in her bedroom and lets the 2 twins in. She asks that the two upstarts explain to Velita what they are doing here and how they got here. Find Velita. Velita looks at the twins and can't figure out what she could have done wrong. Maybe she didn't explain to these former slaves their situation, and that's why they decided to come to Velita again. She realizes that there is still a plate of meat on her table. Velita realizes that this reproachful look was due to Velita eating such a delicious meal without the two of them. The girl goes into her inventory and then pulls out a large piece of meat and offers it to the guys to eat. But the girl doesn't even have time to react. The twins snatch the meat from her hands and begin to devour it greedily. Velita doesn't remember that in the novel the clan called Tan was so similar to dogs. When the twins have eaten a little, Velita says that means these two have freed the other prisoners and decided to come to her. Velita thanks them for honoring her request. The twin girl says that Velita didn't go anywhere yesterday and how she knew the guys were able to rescue the other captives. Meanwhile, the guy asks that Velita is most likely a hidden mage. The girl realizes that they must have been following her. The guys ask, wasn't it possible for them to follow Velita? They followed Velita and no one even noticed them. Velita realizes that these two are like real dogs. Velita says she's not a magician and the boys know it. They don't sense any power coming from Velita, and that turns out to be true. But the man says that Velita got the meat out of thin air, and the cake was also taken out of nowhere, and how Velita was able to do all this. The girl realizes that it will be difficult to explain to the twins that they find themselves in a game, and there is such a thing as inventory. Also, the twin sister questions how Kang Hyun realized that they freed other people. Velita doesn't even realize that they've been following her all this time, and she's stupid. The guys think a lot of themselves and look at each other to discuss Velita. The next moment, Velita threatens the twins that if they call her stupid again, she won't get another piece of meat. The twins apologize, seeing how Mistress's character has changed, and admit they were wrong. Velita says that it will be difficult for her to explain to the twins what her powers are, and that the twins will soon return to the savannah and they will not meet again. Why would they want to know more information about Velita that they won't meet again? The twins say that they will not return to the savannah again and they will stay here from Mistress. Velita was shocked and doesn't understand why the twins want to stay here so much and why they don't want to go back to their home. After all, if they are caught again, Velita may not be able to help the twins. Velita's efforts yesterday were in vain, but the twins say that they will not be caught again and that they should just kill the one who caught them. But Velita says you can't do that. Gemini asks, why does Velita smile and say that it was wrong to kill their slave trader? Also fails to notice that Velita is laughing too loudly and merrily. Velita realizes she couldn't help herself after seeing such cute twin faces. The girl asks, would Velita be happy if the twins succeeded in killing that snake? Velita realizes that as a daughter she can be happy about her father's death. The girl makes a puzzled look. The twins say that Velita is faking and they saw everything. But Velita again intimidates the twins with meat and says they can't just kill her father because Velita still needs her father. But to be honest, Velita doesn't even hope Carlin dies. He's a villain. But after all, Velita made him that way when she was in her past life and designed this game. However, if the twins kill Carlin, it will be a just revenge for all the bad things Carlin has done to other people. But Velita refuses to let the twins implicate her in her father's death. Then the twins agree they won't kill the Carians. Velita is surprised how easily the twins agreed and asks, why did they agree to this? Twin girl says that Velita said she still needs Carlin if their friend needs a father, then the twins won't touch him. But once the man's no longer needed, let Velita tell the twins that and they'll kill him. They want to protect Velita and be by her side with him because they are very grateful to the mistress for saving them. The twins say that Velita has a lot of interesting things to do and they will never be bored. Velita knows that the members of the Tan clan can only be rescued by the Tan clan itself. But Velita helped them, so the boys are grateful to the mistress for spilling her blood, even her own blood to save them, so the twins realize that Velita's behavior is very unusual. They wonder what kind of person Velita is, and the mistress must live to the very end so that the twins can repay her for her kindness, and Velita must, to survive and answer their questions. I realize that these twins are amazing people, and she decides to ask what their names are for the first time in so long. Next, the twins tell her that the guy's name is Rachel, the girl's name is Roska. Valita realizes that Roska and Rachel are very beautiful names, and it is good that they are here with the mistress because Valita is glad to have their help. She didn't even know that their names are very beautiful, so she hopes to get along with Rachel and Roska. But the twins say that Valita should certainly hope that to protect someone as fragile as Valita, Rachel and Roska will have to bend their backs. Valita realizes that she has to be patient to begin with, but in the story, Valita was wrong, so she has to be patient. The twins' behavior is peculiar. Next, Valita asks Rachel and Rosk for help. Rachel asks that if they don't fulfill this request, Valita will die. But Valita says that nothing good will come of it. At times, Roska touches the mistress's hair and asks that Valita say what she wants. Valita asks that Gemini find the man named Austin. Valita tells them that this is the man who will save her life. 4 days pass, and Valita feels that he must have explained to the twins wrongly the job that they were not even supposed to do. Valita sees a sack in front of her with someone clearly alive in it. Apparently, Rachel and Roska did. It's as clumsy as they're used to. After finding the bag with the person, Valita sees that the system has assisted her and informed her of the origin. The system says it's an unforeseen situation, and Valita had an unexpected encounter from Austin. If she makes this character her ally, Valita will have the opportunity to open a new plot. Does Valita want to continue? Valita realizes that Rachel and Roska are just awful. Austin in the story became the commander-in-chief of an aristocratic family, and brought the aristocrat such accomplishments that he was promoted and his status elevated a whole notch in that family. Subsequently, Austin took the post of a high official who helped the protagonists of the game to defeat the villains. In short, Austin was wanted by many families. Valita realizes that Rachel and Roska just kidnapped Austin and doesn't realize what else is behind the opening of the new plot. Valita starts laughing and realizes that she told Rachel and Roska loud and clear to bring Austin normally. But when Valita casts a glance at the twins, the boys look like little angels, and there is no need to doubt their goodness. They first kidnapped a man, and now they look like they're waiting for praise. Valita says they're good and rewards them with meat. She can't be hard on these children who look at her so sweetly. Valita then unties the sack, and a man emerges from its womb. It turns out to be Austin, and Valita asks if he's okay or the man. He asks, "Does he really look like he's okay?" Valita is a little embarrassed. She says Austin doesn't look okay, but not asking something like that wouldn't be very polite. Austin says that these snatchers look like their mistress, and Austin gets annoyed. Austin starts to shake with fear and asks what Valita is going to do with the man they dragged this way into her room. But Valita realizes what subtext Austin is implying and says that he's got it all wrong. Valita has 2 corrections, and firstly, she didn't kidnap Austin to get his body, and secondly, she is not the mistress of the twins but just a good friend. Valita points at the 2 tomboys and asks, "Is that really the way a mistress should be treated?" At this point, the twins look hungrily at Valita and asks if the girl has any more meat. Valita says these 2 are just incorrigible. The man further asks, "Is this really the order of that cunning master of the snake lair?" Valita sighs and realizes that Austin was quick to guess, though anyone would think so looking at Valita. Like Austin said, the snake is very cunning, so it doesn't trust anyone, not even its own cubs. Austin keeps climbing out of the sack and says that heroine speaks the right words, much less such a daughter who is very different from what they say about her. Austin notices that Valita is more kind and balanced than the rumors. Valita thought so, and Austin has a good memory and seems to have heard rumors about Valita. He's much more observant than her blood relatives who live under the same roof with Valita and don't notice Valita's changes while continuing to assume that the girl is still the bitch she was before the main events. Austin says he doesn't look like he's in a very good position to be socializing with such a lovely lady. Valita says that Austin is right, and out of me not trusting his cubs. And maybe then we should think about the reverse situation as well. Austin kneels in front of Valita and asks in surprise, "Does this mean that all this time Valita has been deceiving the head of the Alden family?" But Valita says that she has not deceived anyone because such words are unpleasant to hear. Valita says their knowledge is foolishness, and isn't it? Austin says that babies born in the snake's den are different. Maybe that's why the Alden clan is so successful. Valita says they are. There's someone to learn from, and then she says with a wave of her hands, pretending to compliment Austin unknowingly, Velita goes on to say that, how strange it is that there are snakes that long to get out of their lairs. Velita says these words below the text. Austin asks in surprise, is Velita really going to split from her family of orders? For Austin to hear such words is very startling. Velita says it will be later, and of course it is not the ultimate goal. Austin. She brought her here precisely for her own purposes, though the method was a little rougher than Velita thinks. Austin laughs and says first Velita kidnapped the man and now you're hiring. She said she wanted to get out of here. But then again, Velita is also one of the order. Austin says a snake can shed its skin, but it's still a snake. Austin says the next words much more rudely, showing his disrespect for Velita. Velita responds with the same look and says that there was an escape in Anapa recently. Austin hears about it and wonders, did Velita have something to do with it? Velita says that the same day these twins showed up here, and from the Tan clan. Velita excitedly asks Austin who he thinks is responsible. Velita clearly makes it clear to Austin that she's to blame for the accident and has made things worse for her clan. Austin asks, is it really so easy for Velita to admit her involvement? Velita says that Austin already knows about it anyway, and there is no point in hiding it. Velita says she will get out of here because she has one goal, and for that she needs Austin to reduce the risks of having to take losses. Austin says losses is probably what Velita means by that word. That's what he means. Velita turns away and says that if you don't want her to think that way, you have to try harder. Austin says he hasn't even agreed to work for Velita yet, and the girl already thinks a lot of herself. Velita sits down and asks, doesn't she meet Austin's criteria? He doesn't think Velita is right, and the case that she won't be able to achieve her goals. Austin realizes that Velita has asked a direct question, and a lot depends on his answer. But Velita doesn't hear the answer from Austin and says that so far she has nothing to prove and she understands the man perfectly well. What kind of salary Austin wants and Velita will provide him. Austin was a little shocked and doesn't understand why Velita says that. Velita says she paid $12 million for the twins there. How much do Austin think she can pay him for the job? Velita says Austin is just starting his duties and she thinks we can start with 100,000 gold. In addition to this advance, 100,000 gold will be bonuses and additional bonuses as well as vacation pay and annual salary increase if the contact is renewed and asks how Austin reacts to such conditions. Austin is shaking and says that if Kang Hyun is trying to lure him with such numbers, he has no choice, except to respond specifically. Then Austin's eyes light up, and he says that he naturally agrees with his new mistress and will work for her. Apparently, bribing Austin was much easier than Velita thought, and he will do his best for that kind of money. Velita says he must call her head from now on, and the man agrees. Velita created this game and knows that Austin was wanted by many families. And then, there was the fact that Austin had a taste for gold. The training field of the Knight's Order at the Imperial Castle was at the disposal of one single knight at this moment. The man was very tired and his arms were weak after many hours of battle. The next moment, another man comes running up and calls the brave knight that was practicing on the training ground by the name of Gray. Gray turns around and sees the man in front of him. Gray is the head of the knightly order. Gray then asks, could it be, with a face like that, Count Elend was able to become a knight? Meanwhile, Count Elend was crying. Elend says it doesn't matter now. Gray had better comfort his weeping friend. Gray says that he is particularly interested in whether Elend cries or not. Gray asks Elend to think about Gray's reputation. But Elend asks who is more important, friend or reputation. But Gray immediately replies briefly that reputation is more important, and that was the next big blow for Elend. But Gray tries to calm Elend down and asks him, what happened this time? And it's unlikely that Elend was blown off by another lady or he wouldn't be crying so weakly. Elend resents who Gray thinks he is, and says Austin has disappeared. It comes as a shock to Gray. Is Austin gone? The very man Elend wanted to hire and was so proud of. Elend says it's true, and that while he was preparing the money for Austin, someone beat him to it. Gray realizes that he too has noticed that Austin's skills are very cool and expert. This news comes as a shock to Gray as well. Who could have poached their employee? Elend says that he couldn't just be hired because there is a code of morals for tradesmen, but it turns out that whoever had the time ate whoever ate who. But Gray walks away and says it doesn't matter anymore. Elend resents which side Gray is on, and Gray says he's on the side of whoever has the most money. That's probably what Austin has decided too. Ellen says it's a horrible world ruled by money, and how can those without money live? Gray says that Ellen doesn't need to think about that. He has the title of Earl. Gray feels sorry for him because he'd like to see who might have hired Austin. At this moment, Valita is having tea with her friend Margaret. Margaret notices that Valita is acting strangely and asks if everything is all right. Valita is a little surprised by Margaret's question and asks what she is talking about. Margaret says that Valita has been looking kind of pale lately, and she is worried about her friend. Perhaps Luther or Father Mutt has said something hurtful to Valita again. But the girl was genuinely just brooding, and she's probably looking a little too serious lately. Valita says that it's okay, and that she's not interested in her father and Luther at all. Valita tries to convince Marguerite not to worry, and that Valita is perfectly fine. After all, Valita has no interest in the two of them either. Margaret says she'd rather be Valita's own sister. Then Margaret would be able to protect her more. Valita says cryptically that she doesn't even know, and Margaret has already become like a real little sister to Valita. Valita smiles and asks that Margaret try calling her sister. Margaret is amazed at Valita's request and doesn't know how to express her admiration for her friend's tenderness. Valita says that Margaret will not call her sister, and it is a pity. Margaret starts to resent it. She demands that they stop teasing her, and Valita says that Margaret herself said she would like to be Valita's little sister. Margaret wonders, why exactly does Valita have to be the older one? They are the same age. Valita says that Margaret is correct, and then she will call Margaret older sister. Does Margaret want to be called that? Margaret realizes that with such a great face, she is going to call her big sister, so she decides it is better to stay younger. Valita sees the effect her joke has on Margaret and starts laughing. To top it all off, Valita wonders, has Luther stopped hitting on Margaret lately? The girlfriend confirms that luckily Luther has been less clingy and is probably very busy. Margaret doesn't understand why Luther is behaving this way, but she would like Luther to stop. Valita realizes that even though Luther is courting Margaret, the Crowns will never accept her into their family because of her impoverished family. Although if there is a change, things could be different. We must act sooner rather than later. Valita approaches Margaret and says that the girl should not worry because Valita will solve her problem. Margaret is embarrassed and doesn't know what to say, but Valita asks that Margaret not be afraid and no one will get hurt. It might be better for Valita to be the one to do all this, so the older sister strokes the younger sister's head. Margaret understands Valita, after which the girls exchange. Valita realizes that her sweet Margaret should be happy, so she will do anything to spare her from a bad ending. The next moment, Valita walks into her room and is greeted by Austin. He says that Valita warned him that Margaret was the main character. Valita's goal really is to make Margaret happy. That sounds to me like the rumors that have been going around about Valita. Austin is a little doubtful. Valita says with a smile that Margaret is very nice, but Austin says that of course that can't be denied. That's why Valita is worried about Luther. He's not an easy character. Valita needs to find a man who can protect Margaret. Austin asks why Valita is looking for a man, and Mrs. Joyful states the fact that it is to spite Luther. Characters who would later become Margaret's lovers and protect her. If we exclude Luther and Noah, there are only two normal suitors for Margaret: Prince Kyle Lucius of the Empire and the head of the Grey Order of Knights. If Margaret likes at least one of them, Valita realizes that he will be wrapped up alive and presented to her. Strategic characters are best suited to adorn the protagonist. Velit's confidence in his rightness amazes Austin. The man doesn't understand what Valita is up to. After all, she has a bloodthirsty smile. But Valita says she's not up to anything bad and was just thinking about what kind of men Margaret likes. Valita realizes that if Margaret doesn't like anyone, then she will have to think of something else. There is no need to adjust to a certain ending, because the developer of this game is Kang Hyun, who is in Valita's body. If Marguerite wants to, she can become her protector. Either way, preparations must begin. Valita tells Austin that they have 4 years, 3 years before the main story begins, and 1 year to develop it. There will be changes in the main story. There won't be any, but a lot of details will change when Valita gets involved. Valita will adjust as she goes along and therefore rely heavily on Austin to help her with this easy task. Valita will give enough work not to disappoint Austin, and he'll show his keen mind. Austin says Velita responds so easily it's like he's got a nut instead of a head, though it's very much like Austin and has a very hard shell on top and a delicious kernel inside. Austin promises Velita that he will do his best to help her in this deal since Velita has provided him with the money he needs for years to come. Next, Velita raises her head to Rachel and Rosca. Velita says that if the twins are around, then she will be able to eat meat often. If one day Rachel and Rosca get bored and want to leave, Velita asks that they at least leave a note. Rachel agrees to Velita's request. Mistress Sweet smiles at the little twins and says that she is very happy that they were able to become friends. Velita asks that all those who are in this room with her now help her. 4 years is not as long as it seems, and they set about their plan. 3 years fly by. Velita walks into Galena Alley and then decides to go into the hidden building on the corner. Velita says it's her and not to let people worry. Then the people begin to greet the lady and ask why Velita has been gone so long. After all, they were all waiting for Velita to come. They greet Velita with joy. The girl tries to say that there was no need to wait for her and that Austin is responsible for the people anyway. But the people say that Velita has been gone for a long time and they were waiting for her because Velita is the people's favorite mistress. For 3 years, she has been gathering this team to create her own plan. Naturally, Velita chose only the most trustworthy people and made money and created capital. Velita also directed the general course of action, and Austin did the rest. But for some reason, these people always wanted to see Velita. Even in real life, Velita never interacted so closely with her subordinates except for a manager named Chan. Next, a girl enters the room and says she wanted to ask something in the mistress. She doesn't know why Velita asked her to pick those weeds. Velita says it is lurup. Velita asks how much the girl has collected this plant. The girl admits that this weed can be found anywhere, and the problem is that there is more of this weed than necessary. Velita says that if she tells her why the weed is needed, they wouldn't understand. Just let the girl run the errands, because she remembers everything. The subordinate says she remembers to collect the lurab and keep half of it, so she honors it. Velita says that it is very glorious and a lot of time has passed, so it is time for Velita to leave. The people were surprised. Why did Velita decide to leave so quickly? But the lady is already saying goodbye and closing the doors behind her. She has a lot of anxieties and expectations, and finally 3 years have passed, and now her real game will start, and this phase is the most important. It's time for the plot to begin. The events move to a study in the Trade Guild of Flame in the estate of Viscount Ibodin. Margaret is reading some important document and says that at this rate, they will soon be suffering great losses. The knight asks his mistress, "Is the situation very serious?" And Jill says that the orders mostly come thanks to the Aldens who help their non-family. But even for them, a lot of money has to be paid. But if it goes on like this, they all risk going bankrupt. Knight says that Margaret has a dinner with Lady Velita for tonight and can talk to her frankly about these problems. Margaret says that is a great idea, and when she sees Velita, she is awakened with courage and determination. Velita has become a very good friend to Margaret. The knight says it's a pleasure to watch their strong friendship, and Margaret tells Jill that she shouldn't be so nice because it's very awkward. One of the servants runs into the room. He yells and calls for the lady. Margaret asks what's wrong. Is it really breaking news? The servant says a man from the Sitar clan has arrived. Is this the mysterious clan? And the servant says it is, but the thing is he wants to see Margaret. The girl was astonished. Did this important man really want to see it's her that father always uses for all such meetings? But the servant says that father said he trusts the matter entirely to Margaret. Margaret realizes that she then asks that the servant escort her to the room. The guest says he is honored to meet the lady, and the girl introduces herself that his name is Margaret, and she is from the Flamet Trade Guild. The man introduces himself that his name is Mr. Lucille. The man says that he is allowed to address him without Mr. and just call him Lucille. Margaret realizes that his appearance and character are quite unusual. Lucille gets straight to the point and says that Margaret bought one wonderful thing at the auction yesterday, and it is a white cat with one eye. Margaret confirms that this is true, and she bought this wonderful relic. Lucille says that he demands that the cat be sold to him, and Lucille shows Margaret a chest with the necessary payment in it. Margaret sees that it's a Setter clan amulet. It is considered the most mysterious stone on the mainland and also a treasure revered by the Setar clan. It is rumored that the wearer of this amulet will always be a rich and revered man. 100 years ago, the chief emperor of Astasia received this amulet from the Setar clan and ruled his country very successfully. However, a man offers such a precious thing for some broken cat. She bought the cat at a very low price. Margaret says that this statue is very beautiful, and such a cat can be called art. But it seems to be very important to Lucille since he is going to trade this cat for a valuable amulet of his clan. Lucille asks, "What's Margaret going to do next? Does she really want to raise the price?" But Margaret was taken aback by Lucille's statement, because she doesn't need their clan's amulet. If Lucille cares so much about the cat, she'll just give it away for free. Lucille didn't expect such generosity from Margaret and was shocked. But Margaret says that in return, it is enough for her to see the Setar clan representative and the amulet in person. It's her own thing, so she can do what she wants with the cat. It's best for the cat. Margaret smiles and tells the man to keep an eye on this cat and not to lose it again. Her dazzling smile and her kindness and simplicity struck young Lucille. The man says Margaret is an amazing person and he will never forget her kindness. Lucille next moment places a stone on Margaret's hand and the girl doesn't realize what is happening. Lucille says Margaret should take the stone because he was going to give it to you anyway. Lucille tells Margaret not to refuse, and Lucille thinks that the girl has a right to have the stone. Margaret asks what that right is, and Lucille leaves saying that someday Margaret will find out, and the secret will be revealed to her. The man then jumps through the window and leaves. The girl asks him to wait, but Lucille disappears faster than the girl can follow him. Lucille realizes that she can trust Magnus one more time. Lucille threateningly says that if Magnus is wrong, he will ban him again so he can't go outside. As Lucille was looking at his cat, he saw a girl walking by, and it was Valita. Lucille thought that this girl was interesting, and Lucille also noticed that the new owner of the amulet was also very interesting. Perhaps Lucille thinks that he should stay in the Empire for a while. And that's when the game called Guardian Garden begins. And the first event that starts it all is Margaret receiving the amulet. Valita learns from Margaret that her friend has received the amulet and is now its mistress. Is Margaret referring to the Setar clan amulet? It's very rare. Valita says that Margaret is very sweet when she is worried and can't hold back her emotions. Margaret says Valita should see it for herself. So Margaret shows this amulet, and Valita says that the mainland treasure will be very offended to show it in such a lewd way because you can't just hold such a valuable crystal in your hands. Besides, this stone from his pocket is very offensive to Valita. It's a very important stone and you can't just carry it around like that. But she did. She wanted to take it back, but the man who came to her immediately ran away when he handed it over. So she decided to take the stone and consider it her destiny, and it is a very beautiful treasure. Valita is glad that Margaret is very nice. The amulet begins to glow brightly when it falls into the hands of a just and kind person. Now there is no one in this world but Margaret who can lay claim to it. And Valita knows this all too well, but it's as if her heart is full of something. Valita says that this stone is really beautiful, and that's why Margaret wants to give it to Valita. But Valita gets a little cold and asks why Mark says to do such a stupid thing. The girlfriend says that such an important thing is more suitable for Valita, and she definitely wants to give the artifact to Valita. Valita doesn't want to do that, but Margaret persuades her very convincingly. This amulet is also called the Eye of the Typhoon. Valita gathers her strength and puts her hand on Margaret's hand and says that it is a gift from a man just for Margaret. If she gives it to Valita, it may offend a member of the mysterious clan. Valita says that Mark says she should realize this, but Valita thinks to herself that naturally the real Valita would have loved such gifts and would have taken it. But Margaret says that Valita is right. Valita goes on to congratulate Margaret on her acquisition of the Margarita amulet. The girls laugh out of jest and continue singing tea together. Margaret thanks Valita for her help. Valita realizes that with the appearance of this stone, Margaret's life will no longer be calm, and various adventures will begin to take place. Still, Margaret's fate will develop in the best possible way, and Valita will always help Margaret. This is what all the years of Valita's work and that of her team have been focused on. Meanwhile, Jill says that Mistress was very good at pretending, but Valita claims that nothing is impossible for her. Jill gets up even resentful that there is nothing to counter Velita's words. The heroine asks why Jill is offended since she should be proud to have such an amazing mistress. Jill sighs and says that Velita has a good point. After all, it was Velita who chose her former mercenary and gave her the job. So says that since they're talking about it when Velita's going to go to their branch. I mean, her deputy asked. Velita says that, but she's been there recently. Something must have happened. Jill says it seems the deputy wants to give something to the missus. Velita best to go as soon as possible because there is so much work there they are already exhausted. Velita is not presenting the best picture. This is not the first time this has happened. Velita says she'll move out after dinner. Jill can stay with Margaret. Next, Velita finally meets her faithful assistant Austin, and he says he's happy to see his mistress. Then Velita laughs and says Austin has lost weight. And Austin tells her that it's all because of Velita, because if the mistress is jealous of her thinness, she can take over some of the work. Velita asks, does Austin really think the girl is going to be jealous of such a condition? Velita laughs further, but says more coldly that if Austin is hard up, he can come to Alden Manor and work together with Velita. But Austin says he will do his best to remember his duties. Velita realizes that she came here for nothing, so she asks Austin to cut to the chase and ask what happened. Austin brings it up and says that there are a few questions that Velita needs help with. Austin goes on to talk about the lurab because he has prepared a warehouse for storage, but if there's more of it, it's probably going to rot. If Velita needs this herb, it might be better to start growing it. Velita says she's never thought of growing plants before, and it's a common weed. Is it really possible to cultivate it? Austin says that on the contrary, this weed will grow well everywhere, and that's its advantage. It's worth buying some land and checking it out. Besides, it won't affect finances. Velita says that Austin is right, and they will probably do it that way. Velita says then let Austin buy some land in a sparsely populated area and trust only the most trustworthy to do the work. They could also buy another plot if nothing grows on the first. Austin says he has understood his mistress and will do his best. Also, there's something suspicious going on at the Andhra Trade Guild. The Andhra Trade Guild is a major guild known in the criminal world of the Empire, and they, like the Aries, have been doing illegal business for a fabulous amount of money. Lately, they have been committing more and more crimes, and it's not even comparable to what it was before. Velita's only seeing through the paperwork. This time, they had a hand in trafficking illegal goods, and judging by the amount they bribed the head of the border guard. Austin says they gave the guard a little more than the Andhra Guild, and because of that, Austin was able to get. And that's the report. Velita says Austin did good, and it was a bribe for information. Austin is steadily following her goal of becoming a special kind of scum. Austin laughed out of Velita's joke and says he naturally wants to become worse scum than anyone else. Velita says his potential is what it needs to be. Of course they are joking about the worst scum because everything their team does is perfectly legitimate, and Asian women are eventually needed to deal with the criminals and make their future. That way it will be easier to get the ending they want. Velita sighs and says that they should wash their hands of it, and they have already gotten all the information they need. Velita says that if they don't back off now, they could be caught with Andhra. We need to cut all ties with the boss before it's too late. Austin says that Velita is really very bad, but the girl says it's not enough to be a scum, because you have to be even more cruel. Velita asks if Austin has anything for the day, and the man confirms that for now they have discussed all the necessary information, and then Velita can go, so Austin wishes her to be more careful. The next moment, Velita is greeted by her team and asked, "Is the mistress already leaving?" The men were offended that Austin was the only one who could talk to Velita alone, but Austin threatens his workers that if they too want to talk to mistress alone, then maybe they can take Austin's place. The man says these words with such equanimity and fatigue that people were startled by his words. Velita still can't get used to her business. She seems to be late, and Luther has stepped up his surveillance on her. Velita realizes she needs to be much more careful. Luckily, she left Jill with Margaret. Jill brought Velita all the letters this Luther guy sent to Margaret. Velita was disgusted to even touch those sheets with her hands. Velita realizes that she had to do all this because otherwise Luther would have molested Margaret even more. Velita complains, who could have come up with such a nasty character like Luther? But that was actually her in the past, and now she's complaining about herself. Luther isn't the only one behaving badly, though. If the father doesn't like something, he threatens to kick it out, and his wife is always yelling at him to keep the girl out of her sight. Luther swears that Velita doesn't say anything stupid to Margaret. The whole family is just threatening Velita's life. It's like the girl's the enemy to everyone. As long as nothing but her family is threatening her life, no one will retaliate. Except they're probably already angry at Velit for interfering with their business in Ananta. It's been 3 years since Velita rescued the twins, and the auction has stopped working like it used to. It was the main source of income for her family. And now, Ananta has become an unstable business. The Alden's position among the upper classes was shaken. It was the perfect time to get close to him, though an alleyway is nothing compared to the orders. Bad things happen in this alley, but there is no need to exaggerate its dangers, and the surrounding area has its spies checking the area for other spies. But the next moment, Velita sees a man lying in this alley and realizes that such a pie must have been much safer than her family. But why is this man lying here? Is he really dead? Velita gets scared and feels as if someone is watching her. The girl tries not to turn around so as not to show that she suspects someone is watching her. Now, the most important thing is to show that she does not suspect anything, so that the hidden people relax while the heroine comes up with a plan to escape from their surroundings.